I would like to introduce and pass it over to our partners over at the USC Department of Public Safety and introduce Assistant Chief Alma Burke. Chief Burke was born and raised in Santa Ana, California. She is a first-generation Latina and the first in her family to graduate from college. She most recently attended the University of Southern California, where she received her master's degree in executive leadership. She began her law enforcement career with the Los Angeles Police Department in 1996. In 2019, after an extensive nationwide search, Chief Burke was selected as the first Latina assistant chief at the USC Department of Public Safety. Thank you and welcome, Chief Burke.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you for everybody who's joining us this Saturday morning. I promise you today will be a day where it'll be reflection. We will honor Fanchon on her 100th birthday, which would have been her 100th birthday, right, Linden? And as we talk and we move through today, I just want to spend most of the time introducing this wonderful panel that we put together to just kind of open and continue to dialogue about women and the progress of women in law enforcement, but it really starts with the book. And so I'm going to start with introducing Christine Devine, who has really so graciously decided to be our host today. She is one of the 50 most progressive women here in Los Angeles who continuously moves us in the right direction. We're honored to consistently be partnered with you and the support that you give us constantly throughout your reporting and your career with us here in Los Angeles. So she's been a veteran anchor for Fox 11 News. I'm sure you have all seen the most recent great footages of women and the progress of our progressing environment. So she was honored in Washington, D.C. as an angel in adoption. Christine is a proud Sun Devil graduate from the Arizona State University. Yes, thank you, Sun Devil.
Go
yes.
Devils. We love USC too.
Yes, of course you do. And she is an ASU Hall of Fame at the Walter Cronkite School of Broadcasting and Journalism. No surprise there, Ms. Devine. And she's also part of the Board of Trustees at the ASU Leadership Council in Los Angeles. And in Hollywood, Christine has played reporter roles in movies like Cable Guy, Wag the Dog, and on a TV 90210, American Horror Stories. I think all of us are so familiar with you and your work. You are among a trailblazer in your profession in itself. You have 2 Gracie Awards, and I also see a couple of awards there that you're very proud to share with us today.
Holland Beck Powell.
That's right. American Women in Radio, a Lifetime Achievement. I could go on and on and on, but I think the most important piece about today is that you are honoring us and you are opening up this great discussion about what we need to do and how we have been in the progress of women in law enforcement. So, Christine Devine, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Perfect. And then I'll move on to retired Chief Peggy York. Boy, you were on when I first came on the department, and you absolutely were one of the first women that I looked up to in regards to breaking that brass ceiling and opening up the doors for progress within the Los Angeles Police Department. You have been retired, Margaret Peggy York. She began her police career in 1968 as a policewoman. So you carried that distinct badge of throughout Los Angeles. You worked your way up through the ranks, and in 2000 you became the first woman deputy chief in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department. And as a deputy chief, you were responsible for police operations in the heart of the city and Central Bureau, including 5 different police stations. You, Peggy, you are proud to have been a pioneer woman who changed the face of law enforcement, and so many of us look and respect to you. You also became the first chief of the Los Angeles County Office of Public Safety, specialized police agencies with about 600 sworn and 750 contracted employees. Boy, you just continued on the quest right after LAPD. You didn't have enough jobs here, right? So as you continued your career, you have been married for 40 years, as you told me today, very proudly, and you live with your husband in Pasadena. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Chief.
Miss Ann Young, Captain, retired Captain Ann Young. We've talked about mentors throughout LAPD, and you have continued, even when you've retired, you've reached back and mentored so many of us through the ranks. But I want to share a little bit of your 35-year career with LAPD. Captain Young was appointed to the department in 1981. You promoted to a training officer in 1984, and you worked in undercover assignments, robbery, homicide. You were a detective. You were a supervisor. During your assignments as a field supervisor in Central Area, you were involved in several abilities and promotions for women of color. You were the first African-American woman to be promoted to that rank, and you held it for such a long time, but you never forgot to reach back and help others, including myself. So thank you so much. You hold a degree from UCLA, that other school, right? That other school down the way, as we tell everybody. You earn your teaching credential from the University of California at Irvine, and you have now been teaching over at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and you continue to be really passionate about your education and pushing forward the progress of women in this field. So thank you and welcome. Thank you. And Commander Ruby Flores, how are you this morning? She is our last panelist. She came on the Los Angeles Police Department in 1994. You have been at the 3 out of the 4 geographic bureaus all over the city as a training officer, a pioneer in community relations, connecting our community and our department in many, many ways. As a department public relations liaison, you work for the chief's office. And more importantly, you've been the commanding officer of Hollenbeck and other Rampart, aside for working with 2 different chiefs. And you are now in a position where you are the equity and inclusion officer for our department. You are the first, and in many ways, you are also the president of the Los Angeles Women Police Officers and Associates, which welcomes and continuously promotes men and women throughout the Los Angeles Police Department. I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And then I'll pass it over to Miss Christine Devine. And again, thank you everybody for coming and joining us this morning. I am so looking forward to this discussion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Good morning. It's a gray, May gray Saturday out there. And I think that I'm wondering how many of you are actually wearing your slippers, because it's kind of nice to hunker down on a Saturday in a morning like this. But thanks for being with us to the panel. I'm going to introduce Linden in just a moment here. The reason we're here is for this book, Busting the Brass Ceiling. And I want to hear all your stories about this. Let me just, before I introduce you, Linden, stand by for one moment here. I just want to say why I'm here. And I've been a big believer in community. And those of you who know me from the early days of my connections with LAPD, this is a Hollenbeck PAL trophy from many years ago. And I've always had an interest in policing for many reasons. As a member of society, as a member of community, but also one of my best friends of 25 years was a female police officer. So I've watched her journey, and she's lived every aspect of policing, good and bad, pro and con, and I've lived that with her. Also, I come from a world of social worker type people. My parents were in the Peace Corps. They were school teachers. They were adoptive parents, foster care. So I've seen a lot of the trauma that people experience in life that perhaps leads them into incarceration, leads them into encounters with police. So doing the Wednesdays Child segment at Fox 11, we work with social workers. We work with children who, through no fault of their own, perhaps got a bad break starting out in life. And that can lead to trauma. That can lead to experiences with law enforcement. LAPD, I know you work with the D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services. I do a lot of work with them as well, and their Suicide Prevention Center. So I know that you are moving forward with reform with social workers in that way, and workers who can come out and deal with the mental health issues. And then one story that not a lot of people know about, because I haven't really broken that story or told that story yet, is my own foster brother's incarceration and time in prison. So along those lines, people may say I'm a supporter of police. I want to say I'm a supporter of community, of LA, of better humanity. And that's why I'm here today, to learn more about your stories. So on that note, let me get to my bios here on Linden Gross, because Linden You really tell the history with your book here. I'll show it and my water. Busting the Brass Ceiling. If you haven't seen this book, you can order it. And it really is the history of women in policing, and to the point of where we are today, that we have chiefs in law enforcement and commanders, because Linden Gross will tell the story of Fanchon Blake, who joined the LAPD in the 1940s. And it was a time where, and I'll let you tell the story, Linden, women couldn't rise above sergeant. There was a time where apparently in the LAPD, they thought, well, maybe women shouldn't be out there being police officers, that it's a man's job. And then interviewing some of you for a story on Fox 11, I did learn that there's an effort called 30 by 30 to have the number of women in law enforcement nationwide be 30% by the year 2030. And I'll have you law enforcement officers tell me where we stand today. But Linden, let's just start with you, because we're here talking about your book and your research with Fanchon Blake. So go ahead, start me out. You met her when she was 88 years old?
Yeah, that's right. She knew she had played a significant role, and she had been trying to write this memoir for a very long time, which really starts out with her needing a job, being a single mother, deciding law enforcement might be a good option, getting on, making the cut, being on patrol at that time for a brief window. They were allowing women on patrol in those days. And the problem showed up very quickly. One is that they only allowed women to patrol for about 3 years after Fanchon got on. And then they decided that women needed to be in slightly more feminine roles. And so they relegated them to secretarial work, to guarding, women inmates at the prison, and to working with kids. And Fanchon was super ambitious. She had been in the army before the police. She wanted to rise to the top ranks there. She aspired to be chief of police. She was an ambitious woman. And the fact is that when she was there were 8 women who had promoted to sergeant, and that was it. That was the cap. And so those women weren't going anywhere. The only way you could promote to sergeant was if one of them left. And why would they leave? Because there was nowhere for them to rise. And so it took Fanchon 19 years to make sergeant, which she finally did. And the whole time she kept rebelling and talking to women and talking to whoever she could about the fact that women's roles were being limited in terms of their ability to do their jobs. She basically said to me, I was not allowed to do my job because I was a woman. And that really chapped her. And it chapped a lot of the other women. And finally, the chief of police at the time decided that women just really didn't belong in the force at all. And he basically was creating plans to eliminate them completely. And at that point, she had her pension, and she said, well, somebody's got to do something about this. And I'm safe. I have my pension. It might as well be me. And so she filed a complaint, having absolutely no idea what she was getting herself into.
Well, we've got great photos of her on the job and women back then. We're going to show a Fox 11 News clip coming up in just a little bit. It's amazing to me to think of women on the job then. And Linden, you did a great job painting the picture of what they wore and how they dressed and where they carried their gun. Tell me about that.
Well, they were supposed to look very feminine, makeup perfect, heels, skirts, girdles, an absolute requisite. They could not carry their guns anywhere where they could actually access them. They had to have them in their purses. So, and there's one scene in the book where she and her partner end up in a shootout and have to hit the ground. And part of what they're worried about afterwards is that they've messed up their uniforms and they're going to get in trouble because they don't look like pristine, perfect ladies anymore.
And that gun in their purse. Well, let me bring in the officers and ask you. I'm just going to start with this question, Chief York. And we know we have chiefs. Start me out here. Why is this discussion important to you?
Well, it's important to me because it's an important part of history, and particularly the history of women. And even it began at a time when many of us were not even aware or concerned about the progression of the women's movement and opportunities for women. Many of us were perfectly happy in our, and there was a lot of controversy, even amongst the women, about whether or not this lawsuit should have been filed and what Fanchon's role was. I knew Fanchon. It was during, my time. I was a young police officer, really about 4 or 5 years on the job, and it was really a time of change, and it literally did change the face of policing, not only in Los Angeles, but when I say the face, instead of white male faces, we began to see white women faces, Black faces, brown faces. And it was not only something that began here in Los Angeles, but it began across the country and eventually around the world. And it coincided with the women's movement. And as we all sort of became more aware of the opportunities that women should have, it became more important to us than I think it was initially. There was a lot of concern that, oh my goodness, what has Fanchon done? And we're all going to get fired. And so she was very brave, I think, to do this. And we didn't appreciate her bravery at the time, quite frankly. And it took many years, I think, before people understood what she really did and the risks that she took personally.
Linden, I'd love you to weigh in on that insight. And I know you have that in your book. Joseph Wamba wrote about how she wasn't appreciated at the time. Right. Your reflection on what Chief York had to say.
Well, I think that Fanchon, I agree with the statement that she was very courageous. She really exemplified strength and courage and empowerment at a time. She filed her complaint in 1973. That was all of that was just sort of getting started in terms of women really breaking out and challenging the status quo. And she remained on the force. And believe me, her taking the LAPD to task, she violated that code of silence and violated, in their eyes, that code of loyalty, which was interesting because she, throughout her entire career and into her retirement, absolutely loved the LAPD. This was not, I think the finest moment for her was winning her case, but probably the next finest moment was being celebrated again by the LAPD and brought and really heralded and brought in and shown how many women had come on and appreciated. And I think it helped. I think her experience broke her in some ways. She really suffered for it. And I think that helped start making her whole again, which was beautiful.
I'm looking at the foreword here by Joseph Wamba, who was the LAPD officer turned author. And he writes in the foreword, Fanchon's actions, seen by many as a betrayal of the LAPD's codes of silence and loyalty, did not go unpunished. Retaliatory intimidation tactics against the whistleblower extended past the silent treatment from fellow officers to active harassment. Chief York, I'll ask you another question. Was she around to see you rise to the level of deputy chief and then chief elsewhere?
Yes, she did. She had left the job by then, but she was still around and kept in touch with people. But I think one of the points that Linden just brought up is important for people to understand the personal toll that this took on Fanchon, because as you can see in the film, she's a very feisty individual, and she was very feisty then. And so to the person who didn't really know her well, they would think that, she's tough, she can take it. But there was hatred for her, not only amongst the men, but amongst a lot of women who she thought were her friends. And she suffered personally, not knowing, that it would cause such a personal hatred for her that made her sad, made her depressed. It was a tough time for her.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm thinking of the books in my own industry, and this is a Barbara Walters book here, and I'll just show that because for my industry, there was a time where women couldn't do hard news or the main news, and many times I've been the only female on the anchor desk, and it's been all men. So I think all of us who, whatever career we're in, can think of the stories and the people who paved the way for us. So Captain Ann Young, you're now teaching and you're telling stories to students. What do you make of the book Busting the Brass Ceiling?
Well, it certainly was a very interesting read. I enjoyed reading it, and a lot of facts. Even though we weren't on the job when Fanchon was on the job, I could relate to many of her experiences in so many different ways, actually. And I owe her, Fanchon, a debt of gratitude, because if she hadn't filed that lawsuit back then, I probably would have never made it on the LAPD. She changed the face, she changed the requirements, she allowed the openness that we needed to have not only more women to come on the job, but additionally more people of color. And I owe her that.
Captain Young, you and I had talked many times before, and you were gracious enough to tell your story on Fox 11 as well. And I did not know that you came from a teaching background, that you were also in the Compton Unified School District as a teacher. But I love your story of coming from Brooklyn and applying for policing, and you didn't meet the height requirement. So changes that way as well as to the way we look at what a police officer should be and look like, and the size. Talk about that.
Well, absolutely. When I graduated from college, from UCLA, I decided, well, I might as well pursue my dream of being a police officer. And I had checked it out earlier, but the height requirement was still 5'8", and I'm nowhere near 5'8". So I went into teaching, did some other things, and then looked into it again when the requirement actually went to 5 feet. And that was part of Fanchon in her book, where the requirement at that time was 5'8", and it was changed to 5 feet. But not because of women. It was changed to allow all people, whatever color, race, size, to join the police department. Back when Fanchon was coming on the department, it was mostly men and white men, and they came from the military. But then when you want to broaden the net of recruiting so many qualified people, you've got to, I don't want to say lower the requirements, but you got to open up the requirements so additional people can join. And that's what she did for many of us, not just women, but for also men that are 5 feet and shorter. So.
Linden, do you want to weigh in on the contributions you're hearing about right now? Sure.
Yeah, well, the 5'8" piece was part of the police chief who wanted to get rid of women. Mm-hmm. That was instituted to start being able to eliminate women, because he knew that a lot of the women already on the force didn't meet that requirement. So that's part of where that 5'8" piece came in, and that became very much part of the case. And Fanchon had two attorneys, one who was very much a civil rights attorney, and another attorney who was more of the investigator. So he went to police departments all around the country, getting data on women and policing and size. So, so basically they came out with statistics that showed that good police people did not have to be male, and they did not have to be 5'8". There were very talented people who did terrific jobs who were 5'2", and men, P.S. So all of that was tied in to this case that took 7 years to resolve. And that opened the door for people like Captain Young and a whole lot of men.
Commander Ruby Flores, here we are today. Thanks for being with us. So nice to see you there in uniform and on the job.
Yes, ma'am.
As you're hearing from these pioneers and these stories of pioneering in your industry, what touches you about that?
Gosh, well, Captain Young said it. We owe a debt of gratitude not only to Fanchon, but Chief York. I mean, and the things that Captain Young had to endure, and really not a far too distant past. What was really, really touching, and I had mentioned this to Linden, that there were some things that she endured were just cruel and really was heartbreaking to read about what she did and for so long. And the sacrifices really that she made that really compromised her health, her marriage, which is really hard enough to battle things on the job, but then, your home life is affected by it negatively and clearly by your health. But I think it's important we're having these discussions even now today, because we're still not done. The part of our, as president of our LAPOA organization, our theme, our mantra for the year is, we didn't come this far just to get this far. And I think we do this in honor of Fanchon, and this is how we keep fighting, because her work wasn't done. She, sadly, she didn't get to live up to her full potential before she retired. She would have loved to see a female LAPD chief of police before she died. So I think that's what we need to continue to do, continue to open those doors, lift each other up, and really talk about the benefits and the advantages of having women in the police force. That, you mentioned working patrol, and Fanchon did this. I read she's walking in heels I can't even walk in heels for 1 hour. But can you imagine? I mean, they just made it so darn difficult for her to do her job when she had already proven herself in the military, was fighting those fights there, and the discrimination that she was encountering. I think she knew it. She knew it was going to be tough. And I love the fact that she dealt with it with a great sense of humor. And you could see it in those clips. I mean, she was feisty. I would love to have her as a partner.
Linden, we're talking about the humor here. What amazed you the most when you met Fanchon at 88?
I think it was the fact that she was funny, first of all, as Commander Flores just mentioned. She was also very articulate. She had done a ton of writing that, she had written certain scenes and certain chapters, I don't know, 7 different times. She was not the most organized person I ever met, we'll say that. But she was so passionate. And even at that age, when she would hear of a woman promoting, she would make it a point to call them or write them personally and congratulate them for sort of, carrying the mission on, and it was very personal to her still. And so the video was taken when she was 90, 2 years after I met her. And those are little clips from a slightly longer, a 5-minute video called Still Outspoken at 90. And she's irreverent. She's she would have been a good person had she still been drinking to have a cocktail with, she was that person. She was pretty amazing. And I felt that she clearly had a story to tell. My regret is that this book, that the book in this form, getting this attention, did not come out while she was still alive. There's the little woo-woo part of me that thinks that somewhere energetically, maybe she knows, but she at least we did write a version of it. At the time, I had a printing press in my home. And so I was able to create a book with a cover, print it out, let her hold, and so that was cool. But yeah, she was an amazing woman.
So the book is Busting the Brass Ceiling, right here. How a heroic female cop changed the face of policing. We are looking at changes right now all across the world, in America, in Los Angeles. Commander Flores, why did you want to be a part of this panel? Why does this panel matter today?
Gosh, well, it matters because we need, there's so much more work to be done, and we need more women. The sad reality of it is that as we are hiring more women, and we are talking about diversity, we also have to talk about inclusion. And really, it's not just about the numbers, and having a high number of women on the job doesn't necessarily mean equity and inclusion. And I think Fanchon, she's the proof in demonstrating what happens there. So I think it goes beyond just hiring and the numbers to create a more diverse workforce, of having more women on the department. But looking at the workforce in Los Angeles, I think the women make up over 50%, and versus with LAPD, we're only at 18%. And we've been hovering at that number for a long time. So part of this discussion also too is talking about that's not enough. I think, being tolerated and having one woman in each unit, so to speak, or each assignment is not enough. We certainly deserve a greater role in this department. And we have, LAPD has been very good to me, to many women. There's a lot of opportunity for us to move forward, but there's probably other departments in the nation that aren't there yet. And they don't accommodate women or even welcome them to promote, to higher ranks, which is what we still need. I think we are lacking in having more women in leadership.
Well, I believe per Wikipedia nationwide, it's 12%, if Wikipedia can be believed. And I know there's a goal of 30 by 30% women nationwide by the year 2030. And we had done a story with Captain McRaney in hiring for your current academy class. And I know I can't remember the figure, Commander Flores, but it's a lot of women in this class.
Yes, this is exciting. So this is, I believe it's 54%, but and that is remarkable, because even, when I came on the job, we certainly didn't have that many women. But it's not just about hiring them. So they're in the academy now. It will take at least 6 months or more before we actually see them in the streets, and then we begin to develop them and encourage them to promote. But I think it's a good sign. I think it really does state that there is interest for women to become police officers. So looking back when Fanchon came on the job, one would question or wonder, why would someone even want to become an LAPD officer or a law enforcement officer, knowing that you're really not accepted and that you could only promote only to the rank of sergeant. You could never be anything different, and you had to work certain assignments, but yet women applied. And there's a photograph out there, I wish I had it to show you, but it's when they did begin hiring women, there's a photograph of women all in their skirts and lined up around the building. So, clearly we do have women, I think, understand that there is value to this profession.
Well, I know at the time, Captain McRaney had said to me that, with this academy class, there could be a future chief of the LAPD. So we'll see. Let's go ahead and run, if we can, Jesse, that story on Fox 11 News, in case anybody was late in joining us and you missed the setup, you missed the launch. This is an event sponsored by USC Price Safe Communities Institute, as well as other organizations and law enforcement. And Fox 11 got to talk to everybody but Commander Flores, who was probably working very hard that day. But let's go ahead and run that story if we can, Jesse.
All right, recognizing women in law enforcement and noting the milestones. It comes at a time when there's an effort to raise the numbers of women in policing nationwide to 30%. I talked with 3 officers and an author with stories to tell of busting the brass ceiling.
I grew up in Santa Ana, first generation. My parents came here from Mexico.
On a panel on women in law enforcement, Alma Burke of USC, the Trojans in 2019 touting the hire as its first Latina assistant chief.
I'm so purposeful. I love service, public service. I was around law enforcement early on with my school resource officer, really guiding and mentoring me. I was a police cadet.
Her history is LAPD, 24 years on the job there. The panel on policing highlights a late LAPD officer, Fanchon Blake, and a new book titled Busting the Brass Ceiling, How a Heroic Female Cop Changed the Face of Policing.
This is her memoir. She started on the force in 1948, walked a beat for 3 years in heels a skirt, and a girdle.
Linden Gross authored the book with Blake, the officer making history with a landmark discrimination case.
There was a movement to eliminate women from the force altogether. The chief did not believe that they belonged, that this was a men's job. So she filed a complaint, having absolutely no idea what she was getting herself into. And that ended up becoming a 7-year case that went up to the Supreme Court.
Peggy York was the LAPD's first female deputy chief, retiring in 2002.
It's just a fabulous job. And I think particularly for a woman now, because the opportunities for women are so great.
When it comes to women in policing, there's a nationwide movement, 30 by 30, to have law enforcement be 30% female by the year 2030.
What would you say to, an academy class right now?
If you give it the chance, it'll be the best job you ever have. It's tremendously rewarding, it's exciting, it's interesting, always compelling. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's sad.
And some eras are faced with powerful calls for social change. Ann Young retired as an LAPD captain.
How hard is it to be a police officer right now?
It's very difficult times. It's a tremendous amount of sadness, not only in the community, but with our officers. The times now have made it very difficult for officers to go out and do their job.
Young is now on the board of the Police Museum and is a college professor.
Going into the field of law enforcement right now it's very important. And we need more women. We need more men.
Also joining that live virtual discussion on Saturday's LAPD commander, Ruby Flores. It would have been Fanchon Blake's 100th birthday. We'll have a link to that USC virtual event on our website.
Wow. And so what do they say? Because, there's plenty of detractors this past year about policing. What do they say to the critics?
Chief York would say every agency is looking at change and reform right now. And Ann Young, who left teaching in Compton to become an officer, said she would do it all over again.
Wow, what a story. Interesting.
All right. Well, thank you for watching, and thank you to everybody who is watching out there and taking part in this virtually. We appreciate you spending your Saturday with us. Commander Flores, since you didn't get to be in the piece, I'd love to have you weigh in on one of the questions about policing and moving forward and reform that my co-anchor Ellis asked there about law enforcement looking at this changing era.
Yes, it is changing, and it's, with everything, change takes time. Not everybody embraces it. Everyone has their own idea of what police reform should be and how we should reimagine the department. But what I do know is that this is, the most rewarding and the best career that I could have ever chosen. It's challenging, and it sounds so cliche, but it's, it really is about making a difference, which I think is really should be the motivating factor for those considering to come on the job right now, instead of contributing to the negativity of what law enforcement is about. Join, be part of the change, and have a voice. And I think that's what Fanchon did. I don't think she, I don't think she would have continued to fight if she didn't have that resilience and the passion and really doing the right thing in her heart. And that's really something that's women do well. I think we balance our lives, and we bring a sense of calm. I think, when I would go out on patrol and I'd show up and people would say, wow, they let women work, in patrol. And then I would show up with a female partner and they'd say, they let you work together. That was in the early 90s. So, and at that time, it's almost the same feeling that we have now, where police were not trusted. People, really despised the police. It was a time when the city was recovering financially. There was a police chief at that time that the community was trying to oust. But during those challenges and times of crisis, we can accomplish so much. And that's where we're at now. We just have to revisit, look at it, understand what the community needs and wants, but also really it's our chance to be our own voice and really talk about why we need Los Angeles police officers, and that we are the most professional in the nation. That's what I'm most proud about wearing this uniform.
I think you're referring also in your comments to the 1992 riots and the
Yes.
changes that came out of that. Chief York, I'll ask you about the changes that you would like to see now in this era.
Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to promote is because I wanted to have more influence in the department. And so I felt compelled to prepare myself for promotion, which included getting a master's degree and working some really good assignments. I think that one of the primary changes that's going to happen now are that more women will want to have more influence in police departments all over the country, probably all over the world. I always hesitate to say women police officers are better than male police officers, or women leaders are better than male leaders, because they're not necessarily. It's really an individual thing. But women by nature have a lot of attributes that contribute to leadership and to not really being afraid or shy to express their opinion about the way things should be, and be strong enough and willing enough to say, no, this is the way things should be. And I think women don't always take it so personally when people disagree with them. They're willing to fight their fight in their own ladylike way. And that's important, I think, no matter what profession you're in. And so I think that will be the biggest change. You're going to see more and more influence by women, because you're going to see more women in leadership. And I hope it makes a difference, because things are very sad, and in the communities, or a good portion of the communities, feelings about police departments now. And most police officers are really committed they've committed their life and willing to give a lot to serve the public. And I used to always, when I would see a young police officer, or they would come into my division, I would always ask them, why did you become a police officer? And almost every single person said, because I wanted to help people. And so I think that is truly the nature of why people become police officers, why people want to have more influence. They want to make things better. And, when you see the situation with some of the victims, I worked homicide, I worked a lot of child abuse cases, and when I was a detective, and there's nothing more sad and more tragic than those kinds of cases. You just have such a heart for the victims, and you want justice for the victims as well as for the perpetrators.
Captain Young, you have an interesting position in that you are teaching, I believe it's criminal justice at the colleges. You also are on the board of the police museum, so you know the history very well, which means you continue to work with officers. And you also talked about reform and what you'd like to see when it comes to LAPD or policing moving forward.
Well, what I would like to see, I agree with Chief York, more women in the ranks moving up, because I truly believe that women do make a difference, especially in leadership roles. I would love to see and hear from officers that they have that love for policing again. I think some of that has been lost over the last several years, where some of the officers that I've spoken to, they can't wait to retire. I got to get out of here. I don't like it here anymore. And that attitude is translated to the community. So I would like to see in the reform that officers like I did, even though it wasn't a bed of roses for me either. But when I was done, I had the roses, if that makes sense, because I still, no matter what I went through, had the love for the department and the love for the community. I think for reform, those two have to connect. We can't have officers that can't wait to retire and they got to get out of here. So changes have to be made internally where people want to stay and do the job. And then we have to make changes within the community so the community loves us back and they trust us and they want to work with us. And we learn to listen to what the community wants from us. I think that's totally lacking in this whole reform. And I don't know all of the details of the reform, but that's totally lacking. We can't go back to the days when I was growing up in Brooklyn and officers came to my mother's house, to our house for dinner on Sunday. Every Sunday they line up and have dinner. But why not? That's communicating with our community again. And all of us, I think it was Commander Flores or Chief York mentioned that when we came on the department, we all stood there and we said we wanted to help people. Well, let's do that, because that's part of the reform that has to be made in any police department. Get that love back for the community, get our officers to love the job again.
Well, I just about a week ago went out with LAPD's Community Safety Partnership Bureau and Deputy Chief Amada Tingarides and kind of spent a day with that unit to talk about what they're doing. And those officers have to be in that bureau for 5 years, if I have this right, Commander Flores. And they get to know the community. They're in Watts, they're in the housing developments, and they do events with the community. They respond with social worker type teams when there's perhaps been a murder, as there had been when we were out there, back-to-back shootings. And so they responded with support teams for the victims' children and the families. They held a prayer circle in the center courtyard. So that kind of effort is something that was elevated from a program that was a model program that Tingarides helped co-found and now is a bureau. But Linden, let me get to you regarding the book here. I'll hold it up in case anybody's just joining us, Busting the Brass Ceiling. What would Fanchon Blake say about the current call to reform, do you think?
Well, you know, the thing that's fascinating to me, and this, when Captain Young was talking, it reminded me, she talked about her reaction to the Watts riots and the fact that people were not being listened to, and that until they felt heard, they were going to continue to be angry until they felt that they were being treated equitably. The rage was going to continue. That was, if I'm not mistaken, 1968. So we've now had 50 years. I feel like in many ways, Fanchon did have that insight, that understanding. And I think that does come with, research has shown that women tend to be stronger at fostering those community relationships. They tend to be a little stronger at listening. They tend to be less confrontational. They tend to de-escalate situations. And I think that when you package all that together, what Fanchon would say is feminize the force, get more women on the force and in positions of leadership, so that the kind of program you're talking about that does bring community and policing together, I mean, clearly, that's what needs to happen. It doesn't take a genius to realize that needs to happen, and that is not what has been happening. And we've been talking about it now for over 50 years.
Well, I'm thinking, like, even in my own workplace, to have the diverse voices when it comes to men or people from different communities that are unlike my own community, the history that women bring. And I think too of the women I don't have children, but the women in my station who have children bring a lot of the stories about childcare issues, and during the pandemic, people getting, help to care for their children while they went to work, issues that perhaps I didn't think about. So the inclusion of women is so important, the inclusion of men as well in discussion. The balance, I think, is where we have the greatest chance for change and a better humanity. So Linden, in this book here, if people are reading this book, what do you hope is the takeaway from it?
Wow, I think there are a number of takeaways. The first and foremost, I think, is just it's an inspiring story of somebody standing up for her principles and not being cowed into backing down. And look what happens. She made such a difference to the institutions, to so many lives. And I think that part's just remarkable. I think that there are also insights into policing that Fanchon had from many years ago that are pertinent today. I think certainly her sense of just women needing to be more a part of leadership roles in all arenas. I think that part of the message is that we have made a lot of progress as women, but I loved the saying of, we didn't get here just to I don't remember the exact saying, but it's like we got some work to do still. And I think that a lot of younger women don't really appreciate how it wasn't all that long ago that women really were considered second-class citizens. And Fanchon talks about you were expected to kind of do what you were told and to put a smile on your face while you were doing it and not really speak out of turn. That's how she grew up. She apparently didn't take that lesson real to heart, but I think it's important to realize that we've made a monster amount of progress, and it's shocking to think of how far we've had to come, and yet we still got some ways to go.
Well, I know for myself, the ability to speak up or stand up for others kind of came with time and wisdom and confidence, and also realizing that, okay, I'm not the youngest on the job anymore, and I need to help speak up for them coming up. So Chief York, I'll ask you, when was it that you felt you had a really strong voice of leadership, or that you felt supported enough to speak out?
I think I pretty much always felt it was okay to speak. Maybe naively, I always thought if someone asked my opinion, they really wanted it. So I would give it to them. And but they didn't necessarily listen the lower I was within the ranks. And then you reach a certain point within the ranks where people sort of have to listen, and then at some point they begin to think you're brilliant, and so I always think I had some influence, and I became a detective supervisor fairly young in my career, and I have people even today who worked for me that remind me of taking them across the street to Coco's and having the talk with them and things like that. So, I think it's how you approach people and how you can counsel and help a person grow and help a person become better in their job and help a person, have better relationships just by talking to them, and when Helen Kidder and I worked homicide, we had a phenomenal clearance rate, and we had a lot of confessions, and Helen and I used to sort of laugh. We don't know if they confessed to us because they thought we were their mother, or they confessed because they thought we were too dumb to do anything with the information. But whatever it was, it worked. And so, it's all about how you treat people, and whether you're the first level of supervision or the chief of police, it's all about how you treat people.
Well, we are going to take some questions soon, but I wanted to kind of go around the room here and have all of you just kind of give me a thought based on the discussion we've had so far. If you were to leave the viewers, the listeners here with a thought on all of this, what would it be? And I guess I'll start with you, Commander Ruby Flores, because I have questions for you next. So go ahead.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. If I may, can I just comment on Chief York's last comment?
Please.
Because I think it's worth saying in terms of why we need more women in leadership roles. You asked the question about, having that courage to speak up, not only for yourself, but for others. We need more Chief Yorks to model the behavior for women, because it's often said that you can't be what you can't see. As a woman, as a leader, or say a training officer, if we don't see women in those higher ranks that model that behavior of treating people right, speaking up, training, and balancing life, it makes it very, very challenging, not only for men and women alike, but I think for women, we take on a lot, and we have the message for the women is to say, you have to work hard, but you also have to be okay with asking for help. Because oftentimes I hear from women and I say, the majority of our women on the department are detectives. So we would like to see them be sergeants, lieutenants, other positions, to strive to be in SWAT, Metro, specialized divisions. But many of them tell me that they can't. They say they're not ready, or they say, I can't because of my kids or my home life, or I have to take care of my elderly parent. That support system is really challenging. But when we have our symposiums for LAPOA, that's one of the things we talk about, is how to balance, how to manage and navigate this role in a male-dominated profession. So when we have a chief or a leader like Peggy York that really demonstrates it and talks about that it's okay to reach out for help, it's okay you don't have to know everything and do everything, because you're never going to be ready for that next position. So do it now, get ready, and take it seriously. I think that's really the message, I think, for women to come on the job, but for the women in the department now to continue to advance.
So I can't help but be distracted by Peggy York's cat. I put my dogs in the yard there. No, you're not going to ruin this Zoom. That's what we are at home, though, right? So Commander Flores, did you want to give a final thought in case we kind of get backed up with questions or a show? Yeah.
Yes. So I believe that to support women, that I think that's one of the questions in the chat there. We do have to learn how to support our women and set them up for success. And part of that might be looking at job sharing opportunities or flex schedules. And that's part of police reform. And it's not only something that would benefit women, but men too. We have a lot of, men and women that both are tasked with some of those still other duties in terms of elderly care, extended families, and things like that. So those are certainly some things that our chief of police is currently pushing me to do, to research and look at some of those different options so that we can retain our women, because we don't want them to leave after, a few years because of personal reasons or childcare or things like that. There's certainly a way that we can help support each other.
Well, that kind of answers partly the question from Tina that says, what are we doing to retain women once they're on the job? And Young, let me toss this one over to you, because you work with the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Executives. You're on the Police Museum of the board there, and you also teach criminal justice. What would you say is a trick to retaining women?
Treat them fairly. Give them the right opportunities, and support them. I remember reading in the book that when Fanchon actually decided to initiate the lawsuit, it was like dividing the sea. Some people supported her, some people didn't support her. Even some of the women didn't support her. As women, we have to continue to support each other. Yes. From the ground up. We can't separate. And it's not a us versus them mentality. what happens on the department, we always say that we are a family, but are we really that family? In tough times, are we together as a family? Are we helping? You know, it broke my heart, like Commander Flores was saying, the hardships that Fanchon had to go through. Her health was at stake. I believe she had a stroke.
Yes.
Are we going back to that? I hope not. So what I tell my students, and I have a lot of women in my classes that want to become police officers, that develop that network. And when you join the department, it's important to work hard. It truly, truly is. Work hard, because you're always going to be, and I don't think this is ever going to go away, they're always going to look at us as women as being different. And that's okay. You continue to work through the differences and do your job the best way that you can. But if I were to add one more piece of the puzzle here, it's good to work hard, but you have to develop a strong network. And that's not only a network of men, but a network of good women that you can go to and confide in and talk to. And I think that's very important, because when promotions come around, and hopefully there'll be more women in that room, but you also need a voice of the men saying, yeah, great, promote Ruby to deputy chief. You need that voice there as well. So develop the networking capabilities that are there on the department and continue to work hard. And sometimes get out of your comfort zone, like Fanchon did. Okay, she wanted to be a sergeant, and she was a detective, kind of the same path that I followed. I was a detective for a number of years, and I wanted to get back out in the field, and I became a sergeant because I wanted to make sure that I had that validation that I could go out and supervise people. Sometimes in the detective ranks, you're not in that realm of responsibility all of the time. So I got out of my comfort zone, became a sergeant, worked various watches, then made lieutenant, and then made captain. But at every level, you have an opportunity to influence people, and everyone's looking at you. So do a good job. That's what I would tell them.
And I love too that you both are members of organizations that empower other people, that keep you connected with other members of law enforcement off the job at luncheons and events and through panels. And so I think that you're constantly feeding yourselves with updated information and can share in concerns with other people. So Chief York, as we're kind of nearing more towards the end of the conversation here, did you want to, we still have 20 minutes, did you want to share like a thought as you've been hearing this whole conversation?
Yeah, I would say to women, be brave and be confident, because they are brave and they can be confident. You're just as good as anybody else. Don't worry about what other people think about you. It sometimes takes a lot of bravery to step out there. And if you want to be a leader, if you want to have influence, you have to be willing to do that. And sometimes people will criticize you. Some people will say you're too big for your britches, or, you know, whatever the thought may be. But I think those are the most important qualities you have. You have just to willing to step up.
Linden, I'm looking at one page here in your book where it says, Fanchon writes, as I looked around at the new face of the LAPD, I knew that if I had to do it, I'd do it all over again. And that was her fight to allow women to not be discriminated against the way they were at her time. We look at the outfits there that women were wearing. What joy did you get in writing this book with her?
You know, I think it was partly just being around Fanchon. I think that one of in talking, you know, about what we've just been talking about, women having the confidence to step out of their comfort zones, to articulate positions that may not be popular, to hold steadfast to your beliefs and to fight for those. It's sort of what Commander Flores was talking about. You need examples. You need to be able to see that. And even, you know, I'm certainly not in law enforcement, but I think we all have that challenge, especially as women. I don't know if it's still the case, but there is that piece of being taught to sort of be nice and to make everybody feel good and to please others. And I was that people pleaser for a long time, and it meant a lot to hang out with and learn about somebody who I'm sure had a lot of those feelings too, but boy, she didn't let those stand in the way. She got business done, and she told her truth, and she fought for it. And I think that's whatever field we're in, that's a remarkable takeaway, that you can still be a wonderful woman, but you can stand up for what you believe in. You can push, you can get out of your comfort zone. You can make your life better. You can make other people's lives better. And I think that's an amazing example.
But I want to get to the part here where you say that her case reminds us that with legal recourse can often seem unbearably slow, changing laws, changing society. That slow journey for her, and you all talked about the toll that it took on her. Right. The fight can be really difficult, Linden.
Yeah. Well, she lost her case for the part of the reason it took as long as it did is it went through the courts. She had, there were a number of, shall we say, good old boy judges who did not side with her. And there were hitches in the legal system, and case would get put on hold for a year and then finally get back on track, and the case would go against her. And so, in her particular case, luckily the decision that she won was in the Ninth Circuit of Appeals, and the Supreme Court it was appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided not to hear it and to let the Ninth Circuit decision stand, which was the ultimate victory. There was you couldn't go you couldn't take it any further on appeal. So she won when it counted, but that took a long time. And I think that's an unfortunate truth. And I think a lot of people get discouraged. I can't imagine how she lasted as long as she did with as little good news and still continued to push forward.
Well, we have a question that came into us from somebody who's watching the panel, and I did want to talk about the current state of things when it comes to community and calls for reform, the call to defund police, even to abolish police. I know for you on this panel here, it's not a question that's foreign to you, so I'm sure you're ready for a question like that. But let me get to the specific question here from Lionel, who writes, do you think that any new police recruits should have at least an associate's degree in social sciences or a bachelor degree in social sciences? Captain Young, because you're a professor, let me start with you on that question. Thoughts on kind of, I guess it changes the requirement for law enforcement with this question.
Well, there are many departments now that are actually requiring that their young officers come on with a degree, instead of coming directly from high school, which I think it's not a bad thing, because it gives them an opportunity to see more of this particular field as to whether or not they really want to go into it. Because our classes are quite lively, the discussions are very good, the topics are basically almost a mirror of what they're going to learn in the academy. So I use my classes sometimes as a recruitment tool, because I want them to be exposed to police work prior to actually deciding that this is the career, the profession they want to go into. So I think
what about a background from the military, though?
I think that is also a good requirement, because our agencies are still in that realm of being a paramilitary organization, and we still do follow orders and we still do follow directions. And I think that is a good foundation to becoming a police officer. But it doesn't take away from those individuals that may not have that background, because we still need people that are coming from all walks of life and all different backgrounds to make up a good police force. But education is always a positive.
So, Commander, I'll pose that question to you also about police recruits having a college degree. And Lionel really asked the question also of seeing footage of thinking of the protests with activists being hit with batons. And the question is, do police overreact in certain situations, suggesting that perhaps a college degree might give officers a different kind of insight, experience, or even age? Thoughts?
That's a topic, a hot topic of discussion for sure. I think there's pros and cons in terms of the education requirement. I do see tremendous benefit to having degrees to come on the department. I myself, went to Long Beach State. I was a criminal justice major. That's where a lot of my interest became to become a police officer. I'm not sure if that's really what made me a better police officer or not, or being an athlete, those different characteristics that do come into play. I was 24 when I came on the department. So the age requirement, I do see value with that, because there are studies that state that, your frontal lobe isn't fully developed until like age 25 or 26, and that's your decision-making part of your brain. So to make that a requirement, that may answer that question that Lionel had in terms of maturity, of ability to make decisions. But it's just not that in itself. It's training in having that balanced approach to not overreact. Much of what we do in police work is difficult to train for and create real life situations, because it's fluid, and we have to train to a worst case scenario. We have to train to what the community or the person that we're being confronted with, train to their behaviors. Many people, traditionally, many people aren't getting in fights and having to have a similar encounter like that before coming on the job. So that's just speaks to the level of training that's required. My fear with having the educational requirement is that we may unintentionally exclude some candidates that are really have life experience, that certainly maybe did not have the opportunity or the ability to obtain a college degree, but they're clearly qualified in so many other ways. They may have gone to the military or something like that. And so they do bring a lot to the table. And to Captain Young's point too, we want people from all different walks of life. And sometimes that college student straight from college with a 4-year degree that never had a job ever, or may have had a job, working in a fast food restaurant or something in between going to school, and then now we want to make them a police officer. That's a lot to have high expectations of the level of responsibility that's required for a police officer.
With that question, I really hadn't thought about, does it exclude some people? Because I'm thinking, I'm on the board of trustees at my university, Arizona State University, which prides itself at being very inclusive. You don't have to be a straight A student. They don't turn away a lot of people. They think that college should be for you, for everybody. Let's open the doors. Please come in. But not every university or school thinks that way. And that would exclude some people who perhaps didn't get into college or couldn't afford to go, or had a family circumstance that they had to spend time with family and maybe couldn't dedicate the full time to get a degree. Chief York, you've seen a lot over your time. What would you say about that idea of only having officers with a college degree?
Well, I don't think we should only have officers with college degrees. Although I think a college degree is important, and if you have it, I think it most likely is beneficial to you, just because it gives you a broader perspective and a little more life experience. But I absolutely agree that there are so many good people out there who have had life experiences that has caused them to really have a heart for people, and they have been in a life circumstance that has been difficult. They understand that most likely most of the situations we run into with people is a very difficult situation for that person. So they just, I think maybe they have more empathy, and so I think the testing and the psychological testing is an important part of the employment process. And you learn a lot about individuals and their nature, and I think that's the most important part. But I would never say that I didn't think education is important, because I do if you have that opportunity.
All right, we are about the home stretch here of this. So I do think I have to pose the question about reform. And there's always talk of meeting people where they're at. And there are calls for reform, change, defund the police. You all know that. So I would say, if you could give me a final thought on where you think we go from here with that call or that question. And I'll start with you, Linden, because you're the author of the book. Do you have a thought on that as you're continuing to tell the story of the history of women in policing?
I think Fanchon would have said, aside from bringing more women into policing, that the training needed to shift away from a sense of, if you do that out in the field, you'll be dead. That she felt that there was a lot of emphasis on essentially making officers afraid, and that was part of what triggers some reactions. So I think her reform would be in training.
Chief York, go ahead. Start me out here as a retired officer. What change would you like to see? How would you like to see the community, LAPD, society policing move forward?
Well, society is changing so much now, and in so many ways, so many directions, that I think it is reasonable to think that there's a large portion, or at least a portion of our society, who wants to see some sort of change in the justice system, including certainly police departments. Some of the ideas of how to do that, like defunding, I can't agree that is a good idea. People, particularly people who live in high crime communities, who are sometimes people who, are low income and various cultures, they're the ones that really need the police the most often. And to have fewer police and not having police ready to respond to an emergency is not a good idea. But we also need the kind of relationships that are being built now with community. We've had community police officers for a long time, but the extra efforts that are going now to really establish a good, firm relationship with the communities, I think is a good idea. It's a good idea. And that's something that should be developed and grow to the extent that it can. So I think, it's going to take some consideration. Every association that I know that is involved with police leadership, ICP, and all of those are very intent on helping lead the change. They're not resisting the change, they're helping to lead the change, which I think is a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Captain Young?
Well, I can't say that we still need police officers out there, and to defund any police department, you're going to have a lack of resources when you need them. So I can't say that's the answer to reform. I think part of the whole reform movement, and what an opportunity to take a look at what we've been doing as law enforcement for all these years and making whatever changes we need to make in the area of better community policing. I think this is a great opportunity for any agency to sit down and take a hard look at things. Defunding, I'm not in agreement with that because I know that resources are going to be, critical resources are going to be removed from the fleet, basically. But what I think, as far as our reimagining and looking at each operations that we have, is going back to that true community policing from the uh, police officer one all the way up to the chief of police, not only for our sworn segment, but to our civilian segment. Every job that we have on the police department, everybody should live and breathe that they're working for the community. And it should just ooze out through the halls of headquarters every time. That we're here for the people. We're not here just for ourselves. And I know I feel passionate about this because I think this is the only way. We have a lot of community policing programs, but that's just what it is. Community policing is more than just a philosophy, it's what you feel inside as an officer, what our community feels inside as our services to them. So that's reform. And I don't know of any agency right now that's resisting it. I think it's a great opportunity where everyone is looking forward to this reimagining of law enforcement from the ground up.
All right, Commander Ruby Flores, I'm going to give you about a minute if you can, because I want Chief Alma Burke to come back on to close this out. So give me about a minute about reform into the future.
Yes, ma'am. So I believe when there's something that goes wrong, or there is an incident where we inadvertently disproportionately affect a certain community, we need to correct it, and correct it quickly and swiftly, but also not throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's so much that we can work together towards reform together with the community. So I think much of it is seeing eye to eye and understanding, why do people want to defund the police? Why do they think we are, fill in the blank? We may not agree with it. We may not agree with what police reform should look like, but I think together we need to be able to see what and understand each other, to Captain Young's point about community policing.
All right, thank you all for being on the panel. I'm going to get to Chief Burke right now so we can let her close this out. I'm Christine Devine, Fox 11 News, and I will have a story on the Community Safety Partnership Bureau coming up in about a week or two. So thanks for having me, Chief Burke.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. My God, overdue conversation. We started off with Fanchon walking a footbeat and a girdle and a skirt. But, I have to say that that's one of the key components of what police work is about, is actually hard work. I think every woman would agree that it never replaces, you have to have the ability to come in, do the job, do it well, represent us well, and have that, innate ability to change this profession in so many ways. And it starts with your heart. And thank you, Captain Young, for bringing that up, because it really takes a commitment, and having that, the middle name of trouble is okay. It's okay to push the envelope of what's right for everyone. So thank you, Christine Devine. I want to share with you that we honor all of our wonderful guests and contributors to the University of Southern California with a Tommy Trojan Award, which will be delivered to you. It exemplifies exactly what you talked about, which is you are community. You represent us, you represent the profession, and you connect us all when it comes to our ability to be better. And it never changes. So for everyone, this job is not about us, it's about you and what we contribute to everybody in this panel and to everybody who's joined us this morning. So thank you. We will get that fine trophy for you. But I also want to thank my boss, Chief John Thomas, and Erica, from the Police Museum, for contributing and bringing us together, because this panel in itself would not have come to this place today, the 100th birthday of our Fanchon Blake, if it wasn't for everyone who consistently wants to talk about how we can be better. And so thank you to everyone, and to Jessie for always, she listens to our, I call her the ringleader. Jessie, you get us all together, you make this happen. And again, my sincere gratitude to all of you for taking the time to come together today. Thank you.
I'm taking a picture here of us.
Perfect.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to the USC trophy. My co-anchor Alex Michelson went to USC. He's going to try to steal it, I know. But the book again is Busting the Brass Ceiling. Linden, thank you so much for writing this book. It's an interesting read, and for all of us out there who are trying to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thank you.
Saturday.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
you.